they're essentially walking along these curvilinear paths forever. So they have to be forcibly snapped out of their sort of somnambulism by some external cue. They had to answer a questionnaire asking them what they had just seen on social media. And most of them couldn't actually recall, even though it was just 5 minutes ago. It's why people underestimate the time that they're spending in the moment on social media. What strategies are they using to lower awareness? And I did a lot of research into the design of the first social media platforms and the ideas that were used in these platforms. It's going to lead you into a labyrinth, because when you just blindly follow your curiosity, you are playing right into the hands of attention engineers. We now live in a completely alien world where we have networks, where we've created a global nervous system, and we've hooked our brains up to this nervous system so that now we can feel the whole world's pain.
Gurwinder Bhogal, we are delighted to welcome you back to the podcast. You are our first returning guest.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be back, and an honor as well to be the first.
Yeah, you were our first. I think you were our first guest.
I think so.
And now you're our
yeah.
first.
Yeah.
You're our first returning guest.
Oh,
That's
you're
perfect.
a friend of the show.
That's right. So we're going to start off with social media. That's your area of expertise, I find. You are, first of all, before we go there, I just want to say you make my social media experience so much more enjoyable. I go on Twitter, there's mayhem, there's anger, there's rage baiting. And then there's Gurwinder with something lovely that makes me feel good. You're my favorite follow, and so you're the perfect person to talk about the impact of social media on all of us.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
So shall we start with Australia? What's been the ban in Australia? Let's talk about that.
Yeah, so I think we should start off with the research about social media and its impact on children. So for a very long time, it was actually very difficult to study this robustly. And the reason for this is because smartphones and social media have only been widespread since about 2010, right? And so that doesn't really leave us much time to do longitudinal studies, which are the most robust kinds of studies, which require many years of following people over time. So initially what we had for the whole of the 2010s was really just, we had cross-sectional studies, which are not very good, and we had short-term longitudinal studies. And so because these studies were so weak, they did find a correlation between mental disorders in the young and social media use, but it was hard to establish causation. So it wasn't known whether social media use was causing mental disorders or whether the mental disorders were causing excess social media use. And we do know, for instance, that people who are high in narcissism and psychopathy, for instance, are much more likely to use social media and also to use it extremely sort of aggressively. Often. Yeah, so they'll post a lot
often,
more. And often, yeah. So it wasn't clear about the causation, but fortunately, over the past couple of years, it was possible to actually do these longitudinal studies. So now we have much more robust data, and we can establish causation as well, because that's the good thing about longitudinal studies. You can track a child from before they start using social media to many years of them actually using social media, and you can see the difference in their mental health over time. And so it's now clear, there's some very robust studies, and I mentioned some of these in my article, which show that there is a strong causal link between social media use in children and mental illnesses or mental disorders, such as anxiety and depression, and to some extent ADHD, although that's not quite as strong. And so the reason why this is important is because this is now having knock-on impacts on policy. So Australia, as a result, I think largely of these studies, has now instituted a ban on under 16s for social media. So under 16s can't use social media in Australia, or there won't be when the law passes. And the same is now being debated in the UK as well. I think last month there was a debate in the House of Lords for basically instituting the same kinds of bans. we've also seen talk about this in the US, particularly amongst House Republicans, who are very sort of scared of like the impact of because the Trump administration is afraid of the woke mind virus, and so they're basically they're thinking of instituting similar bans.
What do you think of the bans?
I think that they're probably. I don't see the harm in them. Right. I think that the potential upsides are very, very high. So we could help reduce anxiety and depression. I don't see many downsides of it because I don't think very young people need to use social media. I think, they can go to school and they can interact with kids their own age at school. There's no real need for them to be on social media. So I don't see much downsides to it. Kids survived for, hundreds of thousands of years without social media. So, I think they'll be okay. So I think one thing that they should do, though, is that they should be taught social media literacy while they're at school, just before, like this is probably when they're around 16 and maybe when they're into sixth form or college, because I think that using social media responsibly is a skill that needs to be sort of nurtured and cultivated in people. Because I think if you use social media the way it's being designed, this is going to lead to problems.
Wow.
Yeah, you see, I find I'm in favor of the ban, but I just think even 16 is a bit young. I'm a bit hard line, I suppose. I would go further.
Yeah, I suppose so, yeah. I guess it really comes down to what benefits does social media actually provide to people? And I think it does provide benefits, but mainly older people, like people who are looking for work, for instance. It can help with networking. People who want to share their artworks, that if they want to be a content creator, they can maybe do it through social media. People who want to just learn about the world, social media is a good way to learn about the world, learn about what other people think on the other side of the world. But all of these are things that really are more important for older people than younger people. So I kind of agree with you. I mean, I don't really have a strong position on whether it should be 16s or 18s or 21s, but I think maybe a middle point, 18 maybe. But
I would think 18 too. What, are you going to disagree with me, Stella?
I love the idea of social media literacy. I kind of see it like drinking and other things that you kind of have to learn how to handle it. I am in favor of the bans. The only downside I can see of these bans is bans in a culture aren't a good thing in my world. That I'm very uneasy about authoritarian kind of sledgehammers.
I'm the same. Yeah. This is
Yeah,
one of the few bands that I don't really have a
me
big
too.
problem with.
Yeah. I
It's
suppose
not really a ban, it's an age restriction, though. Are we against
good
age
point.
restrictions?
Exactly,
No?
that's a good point. Yeah. So, I mean, it's worth pointing out that we do have age restrictions on things like smoking and
Tattoos.
obviously age of consent as well. Is obviously a clear one. So I think I do
Not so
think that
much
the age of consent.
mastectomies.
Yeah, unfortunately not. No.
Sorry. Bad
But
joke.
like, no. I think age of consent should also apply to social media in a sense, because I feel that social media is fundamentally a form of manipulation. These platforms have not been designed with your interests in mind. They're basically there to addict you. They're fundamentally, the whole structure of them is built around trying to addict you. So for the same reason that cigarettes are not available to under 16s, I think that social media should.
It's very interesting. I have two kids, 16 and 18, and honestly, neither of them would have been massively, just, some people, they weren't very addictive types. They weren't, immersive in things. And it's crept up on them, both of them. TikTok, it's just crept up on them, and it does. And they're annoyed with themselves. They speak the language of addicts. Like my daughter will dramatically say, "I've deleted TikTok." And
well, you see, TikTok is particularly TikTok is particularly dangerous. I think I've noticed that there's a difference between social media platforms. I think some of them are not very harmful. I don't think Substack is harmful. In fact, I think Substack is actually probably a positive benefit, because it's long form textual content, and this is what I think young people need more of. They need to be able to read long form content. There's a lot of data now which is showing decreases in attention spans amongst young people, and this is partly a result of the shift away from books towards video content and image-based content. And when you look at the most problematic social media platforms, the ones that are most implicated in things like social contagions and mental disorders, they tend to be Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok. In other words, image and video-based social media. So those are a lot more harmful, I think, than the text-based ones. Because I think with the text-based ones, you actually have to engage your critical thinking to a certain extent. When you read, you are sort of interacting with the text. It's an active process. Whereas when you are watching video, it's a passive process. Your eyes are open and you're just letting this information pass, just sort of fall into your mind. And that, I think, is where people can become quite vulnerable. So I think we need more reading. I think reading is a big problem at the moment. There's a lack of it. There's a serious lack of reading. And when you don't have a well-educated populace, this causes so many problems down the road. It could lead to the end of democracy, because obviously democracy is built on the idea that you have an educated populace and a populace that's capable of critical thinking, and that has an attention span long enough to actually understand what politicians are doing. But if your entire information diet is video and image, your brain is going to atrophy. And this is going to have a lot of impacts, not just on the individual level, not just on individual health, but on societal health. So I would encourage, people to seek out Substack and Medium, even, anything that's long form, I think is much better.
Without doubt. You see, in my mind, Substack is not even social media. Am I wrong about that? Is Substack social media?
It technically counts as social media because it's structured like a social media platform. But I mean, it is fundamentally different in the sense that it's long form. Pretty much every other social media platform is short term. I mean, YouTube was also a social media platform, but it does have long form videos, but the short form ones are the ones that tend to get the most views.
Yeah.
Because again, people's attention spans are on the sort of downward spiral. So I think this is, again, another reason why it's important to protect kids from social media, because of the effect that it has, not just on anxiety and depression, but also on attention spans, which is extremely important, probably more important than the mental disorders. Because if you don't have a long attention span, you basically become a non-functional person. You can't function,
Right.
And we don't know what the long-term effects of these are going to be, because as I said before, social media and smartphones have only been around since 2010. They've only been widespread since 2010. So we don't know what is going to happen to these kids that grew up on social media when they're older. Will they be able to function or not? So I think we should take precautions now, because obviously the cost of this is potentially extremely high.
Tell me why you think your essay was titled "Social Media Shortens Your Life."
Okay, so this is quite a long story. So, when you look at all of these problems that we've been talking about, and this includes things like the sort of the surge in cases of gender dysphoria, a lot of it seems to be linked to social media addiction. Because I think, you guys will know this a lot better than I do, but I think that the surges in gender dysphoria began around the same time as smartphones and social media.
Oh, it's like a parallel graph. When you look at the surge in social media, look at the surge in anxiety, and you look at the surge in gender dysphoria, and you're like, oh my God, they're so similar. Sorry. Keep going.
Yeah. So I think a lot of problems that we're facing now are downstream of social media addiction. I think social media addiction is really the sort of the fount of so many of these problems. And I myself have actually kind of struggled with social media addiction to a certain extent. I wouldn't say I was like super addicted, but I use it more than I want to sometimes. And this was particularly true for me in sort of like the early 2024. I was spending far too much time on it. And one thing I noticed, which was really weird, was that I would go on to social media just to check my notifications. And before I knew it, like a half an hour had passed. And what's worse, I couldn't account for that half an hour. I had no idea what I'd been doing for the half an hour. I had no memory of it, right? It was as if that half an hour had just been stolen from me.
Yeah.
And I was so perplexed by this. I began researching it, and I found out there's actually a name for this phenomenon. And it's called the 30-minute ick factor.
I love this.
Yeah. So it's obviously it's not a scientific term, but it's a common thing that a lot of people recognize. And I started to work out, like trying to work out, why is this happening? Why does time seem to speed up when we're in social media? Like why does the time that you're on social media, why do you have no memory of it? And why do minutes seem to just fly by? And so I began to research that. I spent many months researching chronoception, or time perception, basically, which is basically how your brain keeps track of time. And I came across quite a lot of interesting findings. So I found out that time doesn't pass sort of at a constant rate in the human mind. Our perception of time can speed up or slow down quite significantly. And I think we all know this intuitively. And this has also been proven by studies. So there have been several studies that have found that people will overestimate the duration of earthquakes, for instance. They will quite radically overestimate the duration of these earthquakes. And the reason for this is because when people are on high alert, essentially perception of time slows down. And so the perception of time, like how fast we think time is going, is dependent on how aware we are. So if you think about times when we're on low awareness, so when we're daydreaming, or when we're in flow, or when we're having time flies when you're having fun. When you're having a good time, you're not really focused on the external world. You're just focused on what you're doing. So you're on low awareness. So when you have low awareness, time speeds up, basically. Your perception of time speeds up. Conversely, because of that, the opposite happens as well. So you have, when you're hyper aware, time slows down. So this is why people say that when you're in a near-death scenario, time slows down, and all this sort of stuff. And again, with the whole earthquake thing, people overestimate earthquakes, the duration of earthquakes. So what I realized was that you could actually make somebody's perception of time speed up. You can essentially steal time from them by lowering their awareness. And I figured that this is what was happening on social media, that people were becoming less aware. And that was why time flies on social media. It's why people underestimate the time that they're spending in the moment on social media. And so I tried to look at the strategies. What strategies are they using to lower awareness? And I did a lot of research into the design of the first social media platforms and the ideas that were used in these platforms. And it sort of took me to the story of a guy called Bill Friedman, who was he was a former gambler in the 1960s. And he became interested in working out why time seemed to fly in casinos. So
where they don't have clocks often.
Well, it's interesting you say that. So the clocks thing is true, but there's also there's the windows thing as well, that there's no windows in casinos. So Bill Friedman actually debunked this. He debunked this because he was originally a gambler, and he wanted to know why time seemed to fly and why he was just completely losing all of his time in casinos. So some people suggested to him that it was because of the lack of clocks and the lack of windows in casinos, but he actually became a casino manager and a consultant, and he actually spoke to the executives and the designers of the first casinos. And it turns out that the reason why there are no windows in casinos is not actually to prevent people keeping track of time. It's to prevent people from looking in and seeing who's gambling, because apparently one of the major complaints amongst casino goers was that they didn't want people to see that they were gambling, because people that they know would probably think it was a bad thing, think that they were addicted. So that's why there's no windows in casinos, apparently. The clocks thing is probably something to do with time perception. But what I found was that they actually had much more insidious methods of causing time to speed up in casinos. And one of the ones that I found was what I call curvilinear paths. This is a very, very sneaky trick. So these casinos basically were designed in such a way that they didn't have any straight turns. They didn't have any right angle turns. All of the turns in the casinos were smooth curves. And the reason for this is that when you hit a snag, when you basically are walking along a path and you suddenly have to make a turn, that activates the decision-making part of your brain. It basically causes you to awake, because now you have to make a decision.
You've got
Yeah,
active participation is required from you. A decision is
exactly. Yeah,
required.
exactly. Yes. Yeah. So it's basically, it engages the active part of the brain. Whereas when you are on a smooth path, your brain just follows it unconsciously. You don't need to think about it. And
Okay.
so the thinking behind this, what Friedman realized, was that if he just filled these casinos with these smoothly curving parts, then people would never like reach the point where they would snap out of their sort of sleepwalk and, wonder to themselves, okay, I've got to make a decision now. Should I go this way? Should I go that way? Should I just go home? Should I head for the exit?
Yeah, like what
And
time is it? You're like, oh, I got to make
exactly.
a
Yeah.
decision. What time is it? How long have
Yeah.
I been here?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So this proved to be extremely successful, and apparently this is Bill Friedman became like the preeminent casino guy. Basically, he wrote the Bible of casino design, and all the people from Las Vegas to New York wanted him to design their casinos. Or so this stuff apparently worked really well. So let's fast forward now a few decades to the 1990s. So if you go on the internet, if you go to so you'll probably have heard of the infinite scroll, right? You'll find it everywhere.
Okay.
So the infinite scroll uses the same principle as Friedman's curvilinear parts. So basically, if the first social media platforms, they did not go on forever. Like the feeds didn't go on forever. They had an end, right? Or you'd have to press a button or something to get more, And so what this did is this acted like a turn. It's like a sharp turn, basically, in the path where you'd reach the end, and now it would cause. It was basically something called a stopping cue. It would basically make you snap out of your daydream, and you'd suddenly be aware again, and you'd look at the time and you'd realize where you were and when you were. And this would obviously often lead to people exiting the platform. So what happened was that there's a guy called Asa Raskin who's taken credit for the invention of the infinite scroll. Most websites will claim that he invented it. I don't think he did, because there's patents showing that the infinite scroll was invented in the 1990s. But if you go on Wikipedia or if you go into ChatGPT, it will tell you that Asa Raskin invented it. But basically, yeah, so starting in the early 2000s, it sort of started being used. I think Asa Raskin popularized it. He popularized the infinite scroll. And so then it was adopted by pretty much all the major social media websites. And now, there are now studies showing that this infinite scroll is one of the chief reasons why social media is so addictive, because people just don't have any stopping cues. They're essentially walking along these curvilinear paths forever. So they have to be forcibly snapped out of their sort of somnambulism by some external cue.
Their mother shouting at them.
Yeah.
Because
You go ahead first, Mia, then me. Go on.
it's either you, it's in my notes, but I don't know if it's you or one of the studies that you linked, was just describing the experience on social media as just a form of dissociation. That's what you're talking about,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
People
absolutely.
just dissociate, scroll and scroll and scroll, and you need something to just snap you out of it and bring you back.
Exactly, yeah. And again, this has been shown. There was experiments, and again, I think I linked to these in one of my essays. Experiments were done to test whether people were actually aware of what they were looking at on social media. And what they found was that these people were scrolling for quite a long time, and then they had to answer a questionnaire asking them what they had just seen on social media. And most of them couldn't actually recall, even though it was just 5 minutes ago. They had very little memory of what they'd seen on social media. And so, this is actually a very common phenomenon. I've noticed it in myself as well, where if I go on, I'll go on Twitter or whatever, and I'll be surfing for like 10, 15 minutes. And then at the end of it, I just have no idea what I've looked. I'll have a vague recollection of a couple of posts. Some posts will stand out, but generally I won't be able to name most of the posts that I've been looking at. And I've tried this with people as well. I've asked people if they could remember what they saw on social media yesterday, and nobody can, right? There might be one post that sticks out in their memory, which is because it's so bizarre, but most posts, they'll just completely go in and come out the other side. Yeah. And so I call this the Lethe effect, because in Greek mythology, there's a river, one of the rivers of the underworld, called Lethe. And it was the river where people would go to sort of find absolution, like after they'd died. They'd try and wash away their sins, and try and, basically become like divine, essentially. And the way that it would do it, it would actually wash away all their sins. But the way it would do it was that it would just completely erase their memories. So it's like social media, where people go to social media to forget about their problems, but then they end up forgetting about everything else as well. So
Oh my God.
yeah.
And you said earlier on, in 2024 that it had sucked you in. It certainly sucked me in on and off many times. I'm kind of dying to know how you got back out. But just as an aside note that I found interesting is something's happened to my Twitter. I'm not sure what, but the algorithms are very strange. And suddenly I'm being given all this AI crap. And I don't want to change it because I'm off Twitter so much faster. It's so rubbish that I get bored fast and I move on. I put the phone down effectively. And I'm like, I don't want it more compelling at this stage. You know what I mean? Because it's good that it's rubbish. It's almost like bad TV back in the day and you just turned it off. That's what my Twitter is like at the moment. And that has worked for me more than anything else. Some screw up with my algorithm. So I don't even want to mess around with them. I'm like, keep feeding me the slop because it stops me from getting into the heroin.
As long as it does stop you, that's the problem. Like I was telling you, Gurwinder, on Twitter recently, that I clicked on a couple of baby videos, like how there's just people post cute videos of babies, and I clicked on a couple, and now half my feed is just cute babies, and I'm totally there for it. But it's not reducing my time on there, but I get to look at cute babies.
It is me. I think it's the AI that you get disaffected so fast from AI. You kind of go, I put it down, and I'm like, I don't want to change this. I keep giving it. Do you know what I mean? It's almost an inbuilt problem that I want to maintain. But anyway, how did you? I presume you didn't do it that way.
Yeah. Well, firstly, I'll just quickly mention that. So I think the reason why the algorithms are so different now is because there's actually a fundamental overhaul of the For You algorithm. So basically, the guy that Elon put in charge, Nikita Beer, he's basically completely redesigned the algorithm because obviously they were losing a lot of, they were basically hemorrhaging users for precisely the reasons that you described, Stella. And so what they've been trying to do is try to make feeds more relevant to people. And this is why Mia, this is why when you see one baby video, you see loads of them, because what's happening is that the algorithm is now overfitting. It was previously underfitting to what your browsing habits were, but now it's overfitting, which is obviously a bit of a overcorrection. So I think they'll try and settle it down. I found that generally the algorithm has improved quite a bit, but it really depends a lot more on how you use it. So you've got to be very careful what you like, what you repost, what you respond to, because the algorithm is going to bear all of this in mind when it's on what to show you, So that's the secret. Like, you've got to use it in such a way. You've got to use likes to signal to the algorithm, this is what you want to see more of. Like, you can't just, if somebody shows you a nice picture of a sandwich and they're, your friend, and you like it, you're going to see more of that. So you got to avoid that kind of stuff.
Beware what you're going to feed yourself, because it's going to come back at you 100 times. Basically.
Yeah, exactly. So so to answer your question about how I sort of stay away from social media addiction. So there are a few strategies that I use. So one of the things that I do is that I have this new rule, which is that that humans, in my view, I think what I find is that humans tend to find information using two different methods, and I call them hunting and fishing. So hunting is when you know exactly what you want, when you know what information you're looking for, and you go online and you search that thing out. So a good example of this is when you use a search engine and you type a search and you look for it. You're actively looking for something. So that's the first method that people use. The second method is fishing. And this is when you don't really have a clear idea what you want to know. And so you basically do what fishers do, which is, you put your line in the water and then you just see what pops out. So it's the equivalent of going on social media and just browsing your feed just to see what's interesting. And if anything pops out, then, that's the fish you've caught, basically. And I found that generally, like, fishing is good to sort of broaden your information base. So if you want to, have a general idea of something, it's pretty good to fish. But if you want depth, then it's always good to hunt. But I found that what happens is a lot of the time people tend to err towards fishing. They don't have a clear idea of what they want to see, right? So they'll wake up in the morning, they don't really know what they're looking for. And so what they do is they go onto social media and they look for something to be interested in. And I realized I was doing this far too much. Like, I didn't have a clear idea. I just go on social media and I'd be like, and I would, yeah, exactly. And when you don't have a clear idea of what you're looking for, that's when you get distracted. That's, because obviously if you're not going somewhere, then it's very easy to lead you astray, because you don't have a fixed destination. So you have nothing to fixate on, nothing to resist the pull of currents. And so what I started doing is I started changing the way I use my phone. Like, I stopped fishing essentially, unless I had free time to just burn. So what I would do is now I only open my phone and go to Twitter or whatever if I have a clear idea what I'm trying to actually look at. And then when I've seen that thing, then I put my phone away. I won't just go on Twitter with an idea of, I don't really know what I want to see, let's just see what's on my feed. Because when you do that, you just it just goes, like, the time goes and you end up on the curvilinear path, and then it all just goes wrong, basically. And another thing I do is I try not to look at social media in the morning now. I used to do that, where first thing in the morning, because the thing is, when you wake up in the morning, you have loads of notifications in the morning because you've been sleeping for like 8 hours. So a lot of people will wake up in the morning and they'll check their notifications. They'll be on Twitter for ages. But I find that that's actually really bad for my mental health, because firstly, it like the first things that you do when you wake up sets the tone of your day. It sets your mood. It sets everything that happens after. And so if you go on Twitter and you see all this angry ranting and all this sort of stuff, and you might accidentally get into an argument, or you'll receive loads of abuse from someone who's really angry that you prefer pasta over pizza, so like just lots of just nonsense basically will be thrown at you early in the morning. And if you expose yourself to this early in the morning before you've done anything else, it can have a negative impact on the rest of your day. So what I tend to do is, if I'm going to go on social media, I will tend to try to do it at nighttime. I don't always succeed, but this is the thing that I try to do. I try to use it at night, and I also have a limit. I don't use it. Obviously, I don't like to expose myself to too much blue light. So I'll tend to sort of use night mode, dark mode, whatever, and all these kinds of things. So there are many strategies that you can use to limit your social media, but then in the long term, those are short-term sort of methods, right? But there are long-term methods. They're okay. I think I haven't really had long enough trying them to know if they really work, but they seem to have worked so far.
I love the idea of setting the tone for the day. I think that's
yeah,
lovely.
me too. And now I think I'm going to have to stop checking social media when I wake up. I'm going to try that. Yeah. There's a great line in your piece, where you say, make a habit of resisting habit. And I love that. Yeah. Choose a life of choices. Like, that's it. Break the habit. That's what I need to do.
Yeah. Yeah. Intentionality is very important. And I think it's one of the most important things it's one of the most important skills to cultivate now. Agency and intentionality. The ability to resist the current is extremely important. Firstly, because it's the ability that it dictates everything else, right? So if you just go with the current, you're going to be swept up. Like, for example, if I always say that people should have more curiosity, but the fact is that if you have unrestrained curiosity, it's going to lead you down into a dark place. It's going to lead you into a labyrinth, because when you just blindly follow your curiosity, you are playing right into the hands of attention engineers. So attention engineers are people who are employed in Silicon Valley and other sort of tech places, where their entire job is just to essentially string you along, to manipulate you, basically, to make you behave in ways that are going to make them money. So that really means hijacking your attention and just essentially, hijacking your curiosity. So if you are just following your curiosity blindly, you're doing exactly what the attention engineers are counting on. They're counting on you to use unrestrained curiosity. So what most people do is that they won't sort of specifically seek something out. What they will do is they will just, again, like they will do the fishing thing. So they will just look for what's interesting around them. And the first interesting thing that they see, they will follow that path. And so it's very easy to get somebody's attention and manipulate it. All you've got to do is just wave something fancy, across their face, and they'll follow it, right? But if you have a clear idea of what you're trying to see, you will ignore it because that's not what you want to see. So you're like, okay, that's just a distraction. The key is to identify distractions. You have to identify distractions, but you can only identify distractions if you know what you're actually looking for. And so this is why it's very clear, it's very important to have a clear idea of what you're looking for when you go online, because otherwise you're falling right into the trap of the attention engineers.
The occasional bit of phishing, though, would be good for you.
Absolutely.
So you just
Yeah.
randomly come across something that you've never heard of, and you go down.
Yeah.
So
it's all about balance. You've got to have a balance between hunting and fishing,
Right.
because, as I said, like, fishing is a good way to find new ideas and and expand the breadth of your information, and then hunting is how you expand the depth of your information.
Right.
It's a very different type of reading. Like, I know I used to, let's say, different times during the day I'd have a cup of tea. I used to, until the last year or two, and I'd read my book. And now it's slipped into, sadly, I'd have a cup of tea and scroll online. I'd go on to Mumsnet, I'd flick onto you know what I mean? And it's a very different read, and it's a very different space I go into. I can feel now when I read a book, I remember this. It's so much more relaxing. It's such a different space.
Oh, yeah. I still read books, like actual books. I sit down.
I do too, but I'm less and less and less. It's death by a thousand cuts. Every single year it's less, and it's frightening me how much less it is. And I wonder, will I be able to get it back? There is the extraordinary compelling nature of social media really does drag you back. It's you have to be very resistant to it.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because one of the reasons why we get constantly dragged back to social media is FOMO, the fear of missing out.
Oh yeah.
Like, there's this sense that that the world is that's interesting things are happening that you're missing out on if you don't go online. Right? Everybody's on there. All your friends are on there. And so this is what is known as a multipolar trap. And it's basically when you go online because your friends are online, but your friends are online because you're online. And so you're all sort of trapped, in this sort of
miserable,
like,
in a crap bar.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And what's worst about it, especially if you have international friends, is that when you're asleep, your friends are online talking about you or whatever, and, mentioning you in their posts. And so you've got to respond to them at all times of the day. And so you're constantly going back to social media. And again, this has an analog in the casino design of the 1970s and 80s with Bill Friedman. Like, he was the first, as far as I know, to identify this phenomenon, because he basically wanted, his whole design of casinos was to have them compartmentalized into cubicles. And basically these cubicles were designed with thin walls so that people could hear what was going on in the next cubicle, but they couldn't see it. So if you were in one cubicle, you would hear the hoots and hollers and cheers coming from the next. You'd hear loads of people, so you'd think, "Oh, that sounds interesting. There's something exciting is going on in that next cubicle." So then you would turn the corner, and you'd basically end up there. And this also created a kind of labyrinthine structure, which made it easy to get lost. So you'd be hearing all these noises coming through all these walls, and it would just lead you. And that's similar to what we see with the social media notifications, where you're, even when you're not online, you're receiving these pings, these kind of, which are the equivalent of the hoots and hollers coming from the next cubicle. And so that sort of keeps pulling you back, and you've received a push notification, and so you're like, oh, okay. And they've designed it in such a way so that the way it appears on your phone is that you see the start of it, you see the start of what somebody's written, but you can't see the ending of it. So you have to actually go online to see what the rest of the sentence is that they've said. So they give you a little taste of it, and so they're very good at sort of keeping you coming back due to these very basic quirks of human psychology. And that's why, like, really, I found that if you just allow human nature to take over, that's when you're in trouble, because these whole things are built on the assumption that you are going to just operate on autopilot, that you're not going to have intentionality, that you're going to follow your reflexes. Basically, your reflexes will betray you in the digital age, because all of the attention engineering revolves around manipulating your reflexes and your curiosity. And so that's why this is the reason why I advocate for Stoicism, because one of the key sort of foundational sort of principles behind Stoicism is this creating distance between your reflexes and your behavior. So you might feel the impulse to respond to something, and most people will just do it instantly because that reflex is very strong. But you can train yourself to create distance between feeling the stimulus and the response. So, for example, if somebody's angry at you and they insult you online, it's very tempting to just slag them off back, to retaliate, to say something nasty to them. I don't do that, because what I do is I create distance, and I basically use my emotions, not to sort of puppeteer my behavior like most people do, but I use them as information. So I basically realize I'm feeling an emotion, but what I do is I create distance, and I try to view myself feeling that emotion in the third person. So I'm like, okay, right, I'm angry right now. I feel anger. What is anger? Anger is an evolved emotion that is designed to reinforce boundaries. Basically, that's essentially what anger is. When somebody's crossed a boundary, that's crossed like a moral boundary. That's when you get angry. It's like a kind of alarm system, a warning system to warn others not to cross your boundaries, right? And so that obviously was a great emotion to have before we had police and before we had, other forms of security, because it was personal security. It was a way to keep everybody in line. It doesn't work. I mean, anger can be useful now, but it's also just as often, it's a pretty dangerous thing to have when you have a network system. And so I try to think about what anger is, and I try to analyze it, because the more you analyze emotion, the less you feel it, or at least the less you're susceptible to it. And so I think it's a very important skill to have, to be able to distance yourself from your own emotions. It doesn't mean not feeling them. I don't think you can stop yourself feeling emotions. I'm not advocating for that. It's to feel them, but to understand that they're not necessarily telling you the truth.
Yeah.
It's very easy to feel emotion when you're delusional. I mean, we know this with, for instance, a lot of cases of gender dysphoria, where somebody can feel very strongly that they are, for instance, born in the wrong body. But then this is a product of their mind a lot of the time. So, you guys know this very well, that, your mind can fool you into feeling emotions, and those emotions feel very convincing, because those emotions are older than rationality, they're older than reason, older than logic. They're more foundational to humanity than all of those things. So I think one of the most important skills that a person can cultivate in the age of addiction is to be able to create that distance between stimulus and response, to pause, to basically just pause and slow down, slow down how you respond to things. And then you can resist addiction and manipulation generally.
And there's one more. You've got another. You end your essay with another really handy trick, I suppose. And this is what you did when you found you were spending too much time online. You went into a certain niche area of YouTube, and it just, when I read it, I thought this makes so much sense. At first I was a bit jarred by it, and then I realized this makes complete sense. Could you explain it?
Yeah, so again, this relates to Stoicism. So the Stoics had a concept called Memento Mori, which was they would basically translates to remember death. Yeah, so it was basically a reminder that we are all mortal. We're all not on this earth for very long, and so we've got to make the most out of life. And the way that they would do it in sort of medieval Europe was they would keep skulls of dead, deceased relatives or whatever, and they would keep these in view of everybody, so that everybody would be constantly reminded that their life is short and that they have to make the most. They have to do as much, fit as much as they can in the day. And I realized that Memento Mori is actually a really powerful way to resist social media addiction. And addictions, not just addictions, but just generally not making the most out of life, which is, I think, another big problem of the modern age. Yeah. But obviously, I can't carry a skull around with me, in the modern age. And so I figured, and so, I thought, what's the next best thing? Like, what's another way that I can constantly remind myself that I'm going to die, Again, firstly, to stop this being so morbid, I should probably mention that a lot of people probably think that if you're reminding yourself of death, that it's actually going to depress you, and it's going to make things worse for you, and it's going to increase anxiety and depression. But actually, I've found that this is not true. And also, there are studies which have been conducted which have found that when people are reminded of their own mortality, it doesn't actually increase their anxiety. What it does is it increases their appreciation of the present, because they basically increases their gratitude of being alive right now at this moment, which is very important to note. And I think gratitude is so important to preventing depression. I was depressed for a very long time. I suffered from quite severe depression in my teenage years, particularly. And one of the ways that I managed to overcome it was by just gratitude, basically having gratitude. So, you know, like for instance, you know, just the most simple things. Like I try to think about, for instance, if I'm walking on the streets, I'm thankful that somebody built those streets, you know, that I could walk on. You know, so much work went into developing these roads that we just take for granted that we walk on. You know, if I go to the store, and there are, you know, there's so many fruits and vegetables, and a lot of these didn't exist. They didn't even exist like 300 years ago or whatever. They've been bred specifically to be tasty, you know, by generations of human beings. And this makes me appreciate like a basic tomato or, you know, a potato or whatever, like that most people would take for granted. So gratitude is very important, basically. Gratitude is an extremely important thing, I think, to improve a person's mood, their well-being, just appreciating life. And there are a few things that can make somebody more sort of thankful and more appreciative of life than the knowledge that they're going to die. And so they have limited time on this earth. They have to make the most out of it.
Yeah.
And I find that this is one of the most powerful, because death is an extremely sort of stark thing. You know, it basically, as Samuel Johnson said, you know, death concentrates the mind. You know, normally our minds are very diffuse. They're very sort of rarefied, like clouds, but death just concentrates everything into just, you know, what really focuses the mind on what's important. And so one of the ways to do this in the modern age is a bit of a strange method, but this is how I did it. Went onto YouTube and I searched for terminally ill people in their sort of final years. And it's quite remarkable at how many people there are on YouTube who are terminally ill and who basically chart their last sort of years, months, days on YouTube, like these kind of vlogs that they have, these video diaries. And I was listening to the things that they were saying, and it was invariably along the lines of, you know, you are so lucky if you don't have it. You know, you just, before I had terminal illness, I took life for granted, and I so wish I didn't take life for granted. You know, I wasted so many days doing this and that. And so that, you know, they would often give advice to people who don't have terminal illnesses. And, you know, it really struck a chord with me because I realized, you know, I'm so lucky to not have a terminal illness. As far as I know, I might have one, but I don't think I have one right now. But, you know, like it just made me so lucky that I have health, the most foundational thing in the world. Like, you know, if you don't have health, you have nothing. And
what you're saying there, though, Gurwinder, it reminds me, I suppose, having been brought up in a very Catholic world, you know, Memento Mori was peppered in my childhood.
Right.
You know what I mean? It was very definite, a very common phrase that I would have heard. But as well as that, all of the religion, kind of to be thankful, daily gratitude, appreciate. There's an awful lot of wisdom in all the religions that I think our kind of latest generations have it's gone through their fingers. They haven't got it. I don't have the gift of faith, but I do see the wisdom of daily thankfulness, for example. That's a big one in prayers and stuff like that, and the kind of the grounding of it and the repetition and things like that. But I think as well, our Lord died for, you know, our Lord died for us and things like that. Like I say, I don't have the gift of faith, but it does, when you're hearing that all the time, it does focus your mind, all right.
Absolutely. Yeah. And well, I mean, you know, that's the thing with religions is they're what Nassim Taleb would call their Lindy, basically. Like Lindy basically is the idea that if something has existed for a long time, then it must have some kind of utility. And so his claim is that religions have survived for so long, even though their claims are likely false, because they are useful and they helped people get through hard times, whether it was through philosophies or through wisdom or through just following rules that are good for humanity, even if the adherents don't actually understand why they're useful. So, you know, so that kind of fits in with what you're saying. But going back to what I was saying about the Memento Mori, the online one, the interesting thing about doing what I was doing, is that now because you were just talking about how you see a baby video and now you see millions of them or whatever, the same happens with these terminally ill videos, right? So now whenever I go onto YouTube, because YouTube is my main procrastination tool, right? It's where I go when I want to procrastinate. So if I go onto YouTube, right, the first thing that, because you have your recommendation
Yeah.
page on YouTube, suddenly I'm hit with all these people who are terminally ill, like ghosts basically, who are warning me to get away from YouTube, basically. So now I don't spend anywhere near as much
bracing.
time on YouTube. Yeah.
Well, the same thing has happened to me because I clicked on your links in your essay. So I have a bunch of terminally ill people, and it really is a good thing. The first time I read it, when I first read the end of your essay, it did jar me a little bit, and then now I rather like it because the people who do these vlogs are
Yeah.
typically young. They're not
Yeah.
elderly people who are like they've lived a full life and they're 85 and they're just dying of old age. They're
Yeah.
people in their 20s, 30s,
Yeah.
dying very young and wishing that they could have the time that we are wasting.
And they're kind of
by
doing it.
scrolling.
They're
Yeah.
doing it for the purpose you guys are taking it, if you follow me. They're
Exactly.
doing it for
Yeah.
that reason.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I find that the best way to respect the dead is to appreciate your own life more as a result, because it's something that they wish that they could do.
Yeah.
And, so to not repeat the same mistakes, I think is a way to respect them. And it's just generally a good thing to do anyway. Like I'm not like a morbid person that just constantly thinks about my own death or anything like that, but it's just, it's a useful reminder to have every time you're about to procrastinate. Right.
Wow.
So that's why I do it, and I found it does work. It works very well because there are few forces that are more powerful than Thanatos, the sort of the kind of drive towards death, sort of like, or the fear of death.
I've always wanted to ask you this, Gurwinder, so I'm going to. I presume everybody asks you it. Like you come up with a phenomenal kind of thoughts and concepts and stuff, and I'm kind of like, who is this man? Like, does
I
he
know.
sit like Plato in a cave? Like, what is he doing in his day to day? I find you fascinating, I must admit, but I'm like,
Thanks.
how does this happen? How does it evolve? Like, how do I'm just dying to know how that happens. Is it? Do you have space in the day where you go walking, or you know what I mean? Is there a thing that you bring on your thoughts or something?
Well, I mean, I don't know, but I mean, I'm probably on the autism spectrum. I think I have all these symptoms. I've never received a formal diagnosis, but I have all the symptoms.
I see what you mean.
And I'm pretty sure I do.
Says me very rudely.
Yeah.
I just mean you're very clever.
Thanks. I appreciate that. I'm smart in some ways. I'm incredibly stupid in others. But like, it's I have certain obsessions. So I do like to learn about things like human psychology and philosophy, and I read a lot. When I was young, like I didn't really have anything else to do. My mum used to buy me loads of books, so I would just spend all my time reading books, and so that just developed a lifelong habit, I think, of just reading and just learning about the world. So, I'm interested in everything. That's the weird thing with me. I'm very curious.
You're interested. You're thinking about thinking a lot, and that brings you everywhere. I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I like to sort of, I like to mix and match from different disciplines. I like to, throw a little bit of psychology, a little bit of physics, a little bit of philosophy into things, and I just find I don't know. I just like to do that. It's.
Have you read Freya India's book, her new book? It's not out yet. I've just reviewed it. It's amazing. Girls, do you know of it?
I have to read that because I actually had a letter exchange with Freya. She's a brilliant writer. Yeah, she's a brilliant writer, and she touches on a lot of the issues that I find interesting as well about sort of particularly as it pertains to young girls. To loop back to social media, because she talks about the issues that are sort of facing young girls, and young girls are really the sort of premier audience of Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok.
Canary in the coal mine.
Yeah, exactly. So seeing what happens to them is exactly that, is a canary in the coal mine. So it's very important to understand what's happening to teenage girls, because that could really make us understand what's happening more generally, I think. And so
Yeah.
And she
And
writes
just for
about it
people to know,
brilliantly.
it's
Yeah,
going to be coming out. Maybe it'll be out when this episode is released. I really recommend it.
yeah,
Frightening
yeah,
book, but it's about teenage girls and young adult women.
yeah,
Oh my God. And social media, everything what you're saying, basically.
yeah, yeah.
Okay. Do we have time to go to Luigi Mangione before we're done, Stella? Do we have
Absolutely.
time?
There
Yeah.
we go.
And you're good, Gurwinder? You're good to go there?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Because this ties in, right? This is, well, actually, we don't know that much about him, but
We'll
you
give people the
had,
background. Do you know?
first of all, we'll let Gurwinder give the background, because you had a really interesting moment last year with you had a personal relationship somewhat with Luigi Mangione. Can you talk about it?
Yeah, so for your audience who don't know, so Luigi Mangione is the guy that's accused of assassinating the CEO of United Healthcare, Brian Thompson. So this is quite a famous guy. Probably he doesn't need an introduction. So yeah, I mean, I wouldn't describe him as like a friend, but he was somebody that I had a conversation with, a 2-hour conversation with, and we exchanged a few messages. And look, I mean, he was a nice guy. Basically, I just want to say that he was a nice guy. I would never have expected him to be capable of this kind of action. He seemed perfectly well adjusted, normal. He was very cheerful, very friendly, curious, seemed open minded.
Can I ask, was he a long time subscriber to your Substack, or how did he come to be in your life, or
Yeah, so
cross
it's,
paths?
he was a long time reader. So he's been a reader of mine for years. But then he decided to take the plunge and become a founding member, which is the highest tier of subscription on Substack. And that basically
Yeah.
entitled him to a conversation with me, a 2-hour conversation. So we had a conversation on May the 5th, 2024. And yeah, he seemed like a really nice guy. He seemed he was very much interested in everything. He was like me. He was interested in world events, and he was interested in self-improvement, improving thinking, rationality. I tried to kind of get him interested in stoicism, but I don't think that worked. He just seemed like a nice guy. I mean, I think that probably the relevant thing to say for the purposes of this conversation is that he was one of several people that I've spoken to, because I speak to quite a lot of people in tech, especially. And one of the common themes amongst them is again that they're addicted to social media, and Luigi seemed to have this problem. So he did mention to me that he would spend like whole afternoons, scrolling Twitter, and he didn't like the fact that he was doing that. And he said that it really negatively impacted his mood, and made him just feel like crap, basically. And one of the things that we spoke about was how to use social media more responsibly and things like that. And I was going to write a guide for him actually on how he could better use social media, but I never got around to it before he went dark. And so yeah, so it's a bit of a precarious thing. I mean, I'm kind of limited in what I can say for obvious reasons, because the trial hasn't even happened yet. So I've got to be quite careful about what I say. But if there's specific things you want to know, I might be able to help you. I'll be able to tell you if I can tell you or not.
So what was the timeline? May, and when did he allegedly assassinate this man? When?
Yeah, so this was, I think, in November. I think of it was in November of 2024. So it was
Okay.
it was about 4-5. It was about 5 months, 6 months. It's 6 months. Yeah, 6 months
Wow.
after the conversation. Yeah, that I had. But it was actually, apparently, I was the last person to actually have a real conversation with him, any real interaction with him online. Because shortly after I had the conversation with him, he went dark. He stopped posting online, and nobody really knows. I don't know what he did after that. So,
Oh, really?
yeah.
Well, that's what's so fascinating, and yeah, we don't have the details. It's because I've been the extreme overvalue belief that I talked about in Albuquerque, that the in relation to trends, you can also apply it to random acts of violence or extreme acts of violence. Somebody can be a completely intact consciousness, completely sane and grounded, and then just one belief becomes all consuming and propels them towards very harmful behavior, either towards others or towards themselves. And so this Mangione, it's fascinating to me, but what have you made of the response to what he did or what he allegedly did? What, like, have you seen, you must have seen the celebration and the way they glorified him.
Yeah, so I actually am widely reviled by Luigi's fans, because they consider him to be essentially Jesus. They believe that he sacrificed himself for the greater good of humanity. And so if he's Jesus, then I guess that makes me Judas, because I wrote an article in December of that year in which I didn't really criticize Luigi, but I criticized the action. I criticized the murder of Brian Thompson. And that set off a lot of them, and they don't like me now. So I received a lot of nasty messages from his supporters. They mass reported my essays to try and get me terminated from Substack, and so I got a little bit of flack from them. And so I kind of have first-hand experience of interacting with these people, and it's impossible to see eye to eye with these people, because they really do worship Luigi almost as a god. Like, there's literally nothing bad that they could ever imagine him doing. So anything, they will bend reality in such a way that it will basically excuse anything he does, and just turn it into a noble act, essentially. So even the worst thing that he might have done, it's just flipped around and becomes a reason why he's so special. And
there's a real danger for copycat there, though. I just don't understand how they can't see the danger that they're triggering some kind of contagion when you celebrate an act of murder as a moral act and you elevate the individual. How can you not see that there's copycat risk there?
Yeah, there's copycat risk, absolutely. I mean, there have been studies shown. I don't know how robust these studies are, so don't take these as gospel. But there have been studies which have found that in the aftermath of shootings, like they tend to cluster, basically.
It makes intuitive sense, like suicide. It makes sense.
Yeah, so you get a really high profile shooting.
I think it's pretty well established. Columbine, certainly, the coverage of Columbine and the fact that they showed the crime scene, and they showed images of the two shooters with the army gear and the guns in the school. That is widely accepted as being the blueprint for every mass school shooting that followed, pretty much. And they idolized those two shooters to the point that I now understand you're not supposed to say their names. I used to always name them. Wow. And apparently they're advising for all reporting on these types of shootings, don't say the name of the perperpetrator, because they want the notoriety, and it triggers the next young man.
I noticed, there's an exception that's been made for Luigi, because if you go on Wikipedia, normally when there's a mass shooting, the Wikipedia page won't be that person's name. It won't be the shooter's name. The entry will actually be the shooting itself, and then the person will be just a small sort of footnote.
Oh, yeah.
But with Luigi, policy. He actually has his own. Yeah, Luigi actually has his own. Page.
Why? Why does he?
I think it's because he is a phenomenon himself. He's a meme, because he's so beloved by so many people as this kind of angelic kind of messiah, essentially, who sacrificed himself for the greater good. And so,
do you think it's got anything to do with the fact that he is a very good-looking man? Is that helping sell it?
Yeah. He's a very, very charming individual. I was charmed by him. I thought he was a brilliant person, human being when I met him. I even remember thinking, after having the conversation with him, the first thing I thought was, wow, he was a really nice guy. So he is a very charismatic individual, and I could see why he's attractive. He's tall, he's dark, he's got the classic Italian features. He's got a six-pack. He's obviously that all of that plays a part. But what's very interesting is that there has been an uptick in political assassinations, very high-profile ones. I mean, we saw Charlie Kirk assassinated last year, and it's interesting because you guys know Colin Wright. You must know Colin Wright.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, he's written a good
He's
piece
great.
that recent. Yeah, he's great. Yeah, he wrote a good piece in the City Journal, in which he sort of describes what he calls punitive feminism, punitive femininity, because apparently, so that most of Luigi's fans are women, young girls, but also this is a very, very interesting finding. Like, so there was a recent poll that was conducted by Rutgers. It was about 1,000 people, but it was proportional. It was like representative of the population, and it was basically to chart gender differences in support for political assassinations. And unusually, it found that women are actually more likely to support political assassinations than men, which actually sort of I'll get on to why. Yeah, I thought it was a bit strange, but it does fit in with something that I've written about. So basically, what's very interesting is that it was the two people in the poll that they asked, would you be in favor of supporting the assassination of, were Donald Trump and Zoran Mamdani. And what's interesting is that the people that were more likely to support assassination of Donald Trump were also more likely to support assassination of Zoran Mamdani, who's his ideological enemy. So it seems that it's not actually linked to politics itself, but is actually linked to personality. That there's a certain kind of person who supports assassination regardless of politics. And I have written about this myself. So I wrote about how there's like been a surge in a kind of viciousness amongst women, which has previously not really been reported. Because obviously, when you think of violence, you just tend to think of men, right? Because men are responsible for around 95% of all violent crime. So
can I jump in though? Like, relational aggression is how women's violence, it comes out, and social media literally is created around relational aggression. So no wonder. We'll keep going.
Yeah, and I think so. One of the things that I've been looking a lot at is why people commit violent crimes or terrorism. I've been doing this for over a decade. Well, yeah, actually, I've been doing it for 12 years. So in that time, I've talked to jihadists and many other sort of extremists, people on the far right, to try to understand them. And I've also looked at the statistics, the data, and things like that. And pretty much all of the main narratives about why people commit violent crime and terrorism are wrong. So one of the things that you'll hear is that people commit these crimes because they're in poverty or because they're alienated from society, or there's some sort of problem with society basically that is causing them to behave in that way. But none of the data that I've looked at supports this at all. It seems to me that the main driver of political violence and criminal violence is personality. So it's actually your personality traits that determine this. And there's a great book by a guy called Paul Bloom, who he wrote this brilliant book called Against Empathy. And in it, he actually sort of he relates this research that was done on the criminal populations in the US. And they were trying to find out what do all of these criminals, these violent criminals, have in common? What are the psychological traits that they all have in common? Now, again, there's a misunderstanding about this in the psychological literature. That pop psychology tells us that violent criminals are high in psychopathy. We always talk of psychopaths and all this sort of stuff. In reality, psychopathy itself is not actually that high. I mean, first of all, psychopathy is not very scientific, right? It's not in the DSM. It's a general umbrella term for a few traits that exist, right? Such as sort of impulsivity and lack of empathy and this kind of thing, right? So it's not a very, very robust way to just look at psychological profiles. But what's interesting is that the thing that psychopathy is most known for, which is lack of empathy, this is actually not very common amongst violent criminals. And it's quite unexpected because everybody will tell you that this is one of the key features of violent criminals, but it's actually not. There is one thing that is, above all, far more predictive of whether somebody's going to become a violent criminal or terrorist than any other thing. And that is impulsivity. Impulsivity across the board is the single thing that is most predictive, right? And what's very closely related to impulsivity is empathy. People who are very prone to show empathy tend to be impulsive. They tend to feel emotions very strongly, right? and they tend to have little control over those emotions. They tend to be low in conscientiousness, which is self-discipline. So by conscientiousness, I'm talking about the big five personality trait, not the common parlance. So what's very interesting is that women tend to be much higher in empathy than men. And this can, I've written an essay about this. This can go some way to explain why they are more likely to advocate for violence, because we've all been taught that empathy is a universal good, that we all need to have more empathy, that if only we had more empathy, the world would be a better place. But unfortunately, that's not the case. That's not what the evidence suggests. Empathy, and this is a point that Paul Bloom makes against empathy. Empathy is like a spotlight where you shine it on a single individual or a group of individuals at a certain time. And when you shine it on them, you are necessarily casting everybody else in darkness. Yeah. Right. So if I have empathy for you, Mia, and let's say, Mia, you have an argument with Stella, because of that, I'm now going to be hostile towards you because you are a threat to the person I have empathy with. And you see this all the time with, for example, a good example of this is the Palestine-Israel conflict, where if somebody empathizes with the Palestinians, they will become hostile to the Israelis. And if somebody empathizes with the Israelis, they will become hostile to the Palestinians. And so empathy is actually a big driver of spite, a major driver of hostility and spite. And again, this has been shown in studies which have found that in mock courtrooms, people who empathize more with the victim will hand out more punitive sentences to the perpetrators of crimes. So, for example, women are much more likely to exact harsher punishments on people who are accused of sexual crimes because they empathize with the victim a lot more. This is a very robust finding. This has been found across decades of studies, consistently. And so this is one of the problems with empathy, is that we now, I think, it's probably worth identifying why this is a problem. So one thing that I like to do to understand modern behaviors is to go back 300,000 years, right, to when we were hunter-gatherers living in tribes, because this was where the overwhelming majority of human evolution took place. So we are essentially configured for that kind of lifestyle. And in that kind of lifestyle, empathy was a great thing. Empathy was good because we lived in small tribes, and one of the most important sort of survival strategies was to have a closely knit tribe, have a very strong glue between tribes members. And empathy helped us to do that. So when you're in person with somebody and you're having a conversation, empathy is brilliant. It's a great way to understand somebody because you can model their behavior, you can model their feelings based on your own. So if somebody's angry, you know what it feels like to be angry, so you know how to calm them down. And if you want to entertain somebody, you can imagine what it would be like to be entertained, and so that can help you entertain them. And so all of these things, sort of are downstream. So, for example, authors are great at entertaining people because they have empathy for their creations, their characters, which sort of gets passed on to you. So you have empathy for these fictional characters. Great, brilliant. Empathy is great for watching movies. It's great for reading literature. It's great for in-person interactions. Unfortunately, we don't live in that kind of world anymore, where we're living in small tribes. We now live in a completely alien world where we have networks, where we've created a global nervous system, and we've hooked our brains up to this nervous system so that now we can feel the whole world's pain. And that is a very dangerous situation to be in, because it leads to network contagions, to social contagions. Essentially, it leads to what I call emotionally transmitted diseases, where outrage spreads very quickly across social networks. And a lot of the time it leads to witch hunts and mob behavior and all of this stuff. And it's all because of empathy.
Extreme overvalued ideas.
Yes, and overvalued ideas. And I think empathy is a kind of, it fits with overvalued ideas very strongly, because if you have a certain overvalued idea, you will basically do whatever you can to help other people who have that same idea. So it can help. Basically, it's a tribal thing, So, for instance, if your overvalued idea is Luigi Mangione,
Yeah.
then you will have a lot more empathy, not just for him, but also for anybody else who supports that person. So it's easy to form a mob around these
And
kinds of
that would be
overvalued ideas because
if you were to apply that to people who, seek medical transition, they're empathizing all over the place with each other. You know what I mean? They're
yes,
really dug into the pain of their somebody they don't even know online because they can't access their
yeah,
mastectomy or whatever. So keep going.
absolutely. So empathy, I think, is basically one of the key drivers of a lot of this, a lot of problems, not just support for
Wow.
assassinations, but just general hostility, and also I think that it has led to a sort of a decrease in the quality of discourse. So one thing that's a very, very popular idea at the moment, it's kind of gotten a bit sort of cliched, is this idea of the great feminization, which is very, very popular, especially on the right now. And a lot of people are over relying on this now to explain things. And this is the theory now that one of the reasons why we have like these things like wokeness and all this is because women have basically, because of the emancipation of women in the 1960s, loads of women have entered the workforce. They've attained positions of power in education, in the social sciences, where they essentially get to dictate culture, where they get to define culture and all these sorts of things. I think it's a little bit overvalued because, I think you don't need, it's not really just women itself. Like if you go on X, for instance, you'll see that it's majority men, and it's the worst it's ever been in terms of discourse. The quality of discourse is horrendous. So it's not women per se, like women are not the problem per se. But what has happened, there's a specific thing that I have isolated myself. I think that the great feminization theory generally is not a very good explanation because it's too low resolution. It doesn't really explain a lot of things. It doesn't explain, for instance, Trump. Trump is a male. He's about as masculine as he can be, at least in his outward appearance.
Well, he wouldn't be a
And
reaction to the great feminization.
he could well be, but it doesn't change the fact that he behaves a lot like the kind of wokeness, but he's like the woke right in a sense that he's very thin-skinned, he cares about his feelings, but he's like, he doesn't care about anybody else, so he's almost, although he's like the masculine ideal for a lot of people, he actually behaves in ways that are stereotypically toxic
Girlish.
femininity. And so I don't think it's women per se, but I do think that one trait that we know of amongst women is that they're much higher in empathy. And I've seen that because I spend a lot of time reading social science texts, I've found that there is a difference in the way that social science is conducted now, that it's 70% women than it was when it was overwhelmingly male. So, and I'm not saying that this is necessarily a bad thing, right? So according to the APA and according to various other authorities, around 70% of registered psychologists now are female.
Yeah.
And if you go back 100 years, it was overwhelmingly male, right? And there is a clear difference between the way that psychology was conducted when it was overwhelmingly male to the way that it's conducted now. So we all know that men have a tendency to objectify other people, right? We know this from lots of research because men are interested in things and they tend to treat even people as things sometimes. Women are more interested in people, and so they even sometimes treat things as people. And so we have like this old psychology, this male psychology, which was all about treating humans and patients as specimens to be studied. So it was very cold and very detached, and it was often cruel. There were a lot of cruel experiments that were done in those days, where the person's feelings were not taken into account at all. Like it was just literally, let's just treating them as a bundle of stimuluses and responses.
Little Albert.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And so what's happened is that was not a very good way to study psychology, because you need to have a holistic understanding of human feelings. Like human feelings are such a central part of human psychology that to dismiss them is just unscientific. But then we've kind of, now that we have an overwhelmingly female field of psychology, now we have the opposite. So we have now feelings being centered. So a person's feelings now, their lived experience, is more important than objective measurements in many fields. I don't want to sort of, make it seem like I'm dismissing the whole field of psychology, because it's obviously very varied, and there are many fields, and there are many different, and there's a lot of good psychologists doing great work of both genders. But I'm just saying that as a general rule, the way that it's conducted is a bit different. And one of the negatives of this sort of matriarchal system that we have now in the field of psychology is we have this over reliance on lived experience and emotions and feelings and empathy.
Totally.
Because
Totally.
you can see, and you can also see this through the data. So if you look at, for instance, the Google Trends, right? So if you look at Ngram, which basically measures the number of appearances of a certain word in published literature, you see that the word empathy has just sort of skyrocketed upwards since the
Gone up.
1960s. Yeah,
Wow.
it's massively increased. So there's been like this kind of correlation between the rise of women in the field of psychology and the importance of empathy in the field of psychology. And so this has not made things good for the discourse in general, because now we're overvaluing empathy, and we shouldn't be doing that at all, because there's very little discussion of the downsides of empathy, which is completely mental, considering that so many of the problems now, because we're living in a networked age of easy social contagions, that empathy is one of the key drivers of that. It's one of the key drivers of assassination support. It's one of the key drivers of violence as well. A lot of terrorists.
It's
because you're empathizing.
Yeah,
that's it.
And this is why very nice people can quickly turn very evil. And there's also there's research that also shows this is true at the neurochemical level as well, because the hormone oxytocin. So there's a phenomenon which is very strange called the oxytocin paradox. And basically what this means, it refers to some studies which have found that although oxytocin is traditionally considered the love hormone, it's actually also correlated with spiteful and hostile behavior towards outgroup members. So if you have a lot of empathy, again, if you are somebody who's prone to a lot of empathy, if you have a lot of oxytocin, this also makes you more likely to be spiteful. And I think I've seen this in many fields of my life. Like in 2013, when I was in Luton, I interacted with members of Al-Muhajirun, who were basically, Al-Muhajirun is the deadliest jihadist group in the UK, right? And I wrote a report. I did some work with Quilliam Foundation, which was advising the UK government on extremism. And so part of that was actually having conversations with these people, because they used to hang out in Luton, in Bury Park, and they would have stands giving out flyers to people. And I had quite a few conversations with them. I wrote a long 30,000 word report about it. And one thing I noticed about these jihadists was that they were really nice people on the surface. They thought I was Muslim, right? And one of the reasons why I actually was able to talk to them was because they thought I was a Muslim, because I spoke the same language as them, and so that I could easily pass as a Muslim. And so they became quite friendly with me, and they were really nice people. They were really nice. They would constantly, if they were going to go to the shop, they would ask me if I wanted anything. They were always sort of like trying to help me out, and just, they seemed like really nice people, and they were very friendly. They were very courteous in the way that they spoke. But then you would learn that these guys wanted to behead people, right? And it was such a jarring thing that kind of just made me realize that, hang on a second, what we've been taught is actually wrong. It's not that compassion is the opposite of cruelty. It's actually that these two things often go together, and they're often the one is often the cause of the other. Like if you have extreme compassion for Muslims that are dying in Syria or wherever, then that's going to make you a lot more angrier towards the people that are doing it, and that's going to make you more likely to support violence against them.
Yeah. Well, this is the extreme overvalue belief. The belief is that these individuals, whatever group is being oppressed, your belief becomes morally charged, that you are on a quest to protect this really vulnerable group in society. There's your empathy for one group, and therefore in your mind it justifies terrible acts of violence and cruelty against the bad people.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, this surge of oxytocin that mothers get when they've had a baby.
That's what I was just thinking. That's your mama bear instinct.
Oh yeah, that's your in-group. Get the hell away from my baby. Me
Absolutely.
And the baby. Yes.
And you see this also, with the crazy way that people react to child sex offenders. So, probably, I think any normal human beings, right? If somebody's a child molester, right, they will literally be the most hated people on the planet, and normal people will become extremely sadistic towards those people, right?
Oh yeah,
extremely sadistic, like probably the worst. They're probably it could turn a normal person into a psychopath, right? If they know that there's a child molester around, right? This is also this kind of it shows that there's because these people are a threat to children, and obviously children are extremely important to us. We have we have probably the strongest bonds with children than we do with anybody else. And so if somebody is a threat to that person that we empathize with so strongly, then we will become extremely vicious towards them. And you see this, I mean, even online, like poor Claire Lehman, she's a great, brilliant person. And she literally just wrote a tweet saying, is anybody else bored of the Epstein files? And you just see that. You see the pure hatred that she's just got just for saying she's bored with it. She's obviously not like committed any crimes. All she literally did was just say that she's bored. And because people have such a violent reaction to anything to do with child rape or anything like that, it's why you can't have any kind of grown-up conversation about it on social media. But like, this is also, but it's interesting because it also explains why we have the statistical distribution of crime and terrorism that we do, right? The old theories, which are the left-wing theories, which are that the reason why people commit violent crime is because they're in poverty or because they are alienated or because society has mistreated them. They don't work because around 10% of the US population is in poverty. But the thing is actually a much larger proportion is actually true, because poverty is not an absolute measure, it's a relative measure, right? So what is poverty now is not what was poverty 10 years ago. Like the baseline of what is considered poverty is always rising. So even if you have a smartphone now, you can be considered to have poverty, even if you have a smartphone, whereas that wasn't true before. When you look at who commits violent crime, roughly 1% of people commit around 60% of violent crime, right? So statistically, it makes no sense to blame poverty on violent crime, right? Yeah. There's only a tiny proportion of people are committing violent crime, right? And the 1% committing the 60% is a loose figure that I've gotten from looking at several studies. So there was one study, for instance, from Sweden, which found 1% are responsible for 63%. And then there are others which find like 55%, around the same. So it's a rule of thumb, right? It's not an exact measure, but generally speaking, around 1% of 1% of people commit around 60% of violent crime. So what we say is that crime follows a power law or a Pareto distribution. And so it's extremely skewed, right? And so the only explanation for why this would be if that there's actually some kind of personality trait combination which is causing this, because there's no other reason why we would have just such a small number of people committing such a large number of crimes. Like most crimes are repeat offenses. So one way that you could actually drastically reduce the crime would be to not let people who have committed a first or second or third offense out. The fewer repeat offenses people are allowed to commit,
it seems simple, right?
It has a disproportionate effect on the reduction of crime. So if we were to just reduce, give people a 3 strikes rule, it would massively reduce crime. But the problem is that it would also cause prison overpopulation. So we have a bit of a problem there. But that's a very interesting thing, because it shows us that these sort of structural systemic explanations that are most popular in social science, which are basically left-wing sort of theories of crime, they are pretty much just wrong, mostly. I'm not saying that poverty does not have an impact on crime, but the fact is that when you actually look at the data, so one thing I will say is that poverty is correlated with crime, right? It is correlated, but what was previously assumed was that poverty was causing crime. But more recent research suggests that the opposite causality is actually just as often true, if not more true. So what happens is that people who are impulsive, so as I mentioned before, impulsivity is the greatest predictor of violent crime. So if people are impulsive, they are also more likely to be in poverty, because they're going to splurge their savings. They're not going to be able to hold down a job. They're going to have all of these problems. Also, low IQ is also correlated with these things as well. So basically, the same qualities that make somebody a violent criminal are also more likely to make them be poor, basically. And again, I'm not saying here that if you're poor, that makes you a bad person. I'm not suggesting anything like that. I'm just saying that the explanation that poverty is a main sort of reason why people commit violent crimes, that's pretty much wrong. It just it's not supported by any credible studies. It's only supported by the most weakest studies, which seem to be ideological. So personality impulsivity seems to be the main driver. And so this would explain why crime distribution is Pareto, basically, because it's a unique combination of personality traits that cause people to be violent. So impulsivity is the main one, but impulsivity alone doesn't necessarily make somebody violent. You also have to have other traits. These could be things like narcissism, so an inflated sense of importance, believing one is more important than other people. It could be a lack of empathy. That could also technically be a contributor. And then, of course, it could be mental illness as well, like schizophrenia. Again, there's a common myth. One of the most commonly stated things that you'll hear is that people with schizophrenia are more likely to be the victims of violence than the perpetrators. But I have not seen any evidence that that's true.
Me neither.
If it is true, I've not seen. If it's true, I've not seen any evidence of it. It seems to me that it is just that schizophrenic people are actually more of a threat to non-schizophrenic people than the other way around. But yeah.
Wow, we could talk with you forever. It could go
Honestly, all day. I could truly go all day.
Your Substack is a thing of joy, and I think everybody should subscribe.
Truly.
Yeah, I'm going to be starting posting on that more often.
You've gone full time with it, is that or something?
I'm gonna be. Yeah, I've been doing it just as a sort of side hustle. I haven't been posting very often, to be honest. I've been quite lazy, but I'm going to start doing it a lot more often. So start stepping that up very soon.
Tell people what is your Substack? Where can they find you?
It's just Gurwinder.blog. If you search my name, it should come up. And you can find me.
Do you ever write for others, or do you just go on Substack? And do you know what I mean?
I also. Yes, so I've had a couple of pieces in the free press. I think I've also been published. I get some pieces published in the Unheard as well. So yeah. Your
Substack is amazing.
Really?
Okay, well, thank you. We hope you'll come back for a third one day.
Yeah, I'd love to. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
You're brilliant.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Yeah, cheers.